And you were devastating, and the audience was just falling apart. And you walked over and sat down, and I said, you know, you're going to be a big star.
And I looked behind me. I couldn't believe you were talking to me.
Yeah.
When I first heard there was a new television show about a lady stand-up comic in the 50s and saw this picture, I assumed the show must be at least loosely based on the life of legendary stand-up comic Joan Rivers. I was disappointed when I found out that the showrunners were kind of distancing themselves from that comparison.
I guess Melissa Rivers thought that Mrs. Maisel was modeled after, that's a lot of M's, Rachel, modeled after Joan Rivers. Is that true?
No, not explicitly.
Everybody's saying, oh, it's Joan, it's Joan, it's Joan, it's Joan. And yet I never hear from the people that make it or the actors or anything saying, hey, she was one of my inspirations. She was one of the inspirations.
The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel all-star cast includes Rachel Brosnahan, Alex Borstein, Tony Shalhoub, who is brilliant, Marin Hinkle, and stand-up comedian Kevin Pollak.
Spock, Bone Scotty.
Who is amazing. They're all amazing. It's set in New York City in the late 1950s with Miriam Midge Maisel as a happily married, she thinks, newlywed, about to start her new life as a mother and wife. Come to find out, her husband has other plans and is seeing someone else. This revelation results in a split for the couple and a drunken Mrs. Maisel doing her first stand-up routine in real-life comedy club, the Gaslight Cafe.
Midway to possible salvation announced by the voice.
A dank counterculture
Promoter crooning in my ear.
hotspot of a club in Lower Manhattan,
Arrival land.
where the beat poets,
Beautiful Bible.
musicians like Dylan, and comics hone their skills. Just as in this show, the real New York City in the 1950s was also a time of great change and upheaval. And one woman who embraced this change was Joan Rivers, a comedian who would go on to influence this hit show, we think, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Like Midge Maisel, Joan Rivers was a Jewish woman from New York City who defied societal norms of the time to pursue a career in stand-up comedy, something only a very few women at the time did. She shed the image of what a female entertainer could be. Instead of timid and demure, she was bold, brash, and most of all, hilarious. And just like Mrs. Maisel, these traits sometimes got her into trouble.
There are some people who said your joke was offensive. How do you respond to that?
It's a joke, number one.
Both Joan and Midge also attended prestigious schools, with Rivers graduating from Barnard with a degree in English literature and anthropology.
And let's hear it for him, Lenny Bruce.
Another connection between Rivers and Maisel was Lenny Bruce, a controversial comedian and free speech advocate who is often in trouble with the law for his outrageous, for the time, shows. In The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Bruce opens for Midge at the Gaslight after she's blacklisted by Sophie Lennon, and we'll talk more about her later. In real life, Bruce once saw Rivers perform at a neighboring club, The Bitter End, after which he wrote her a note that gave her the boost she needed, telling her she was going to be a star. Though, as Joan herself points out, there's a bit more to that story.
For years, I lived on Lenny Bruce sent me a show. You're right, they're wrong. And then one night I'm sitting with George Carlin, and he's saying, you know, Lenny loved me. Because we all, everybody was about Lenny loving you. I said, yeah. He said, he wrote me a note one time. Said, you're right, they're wrong.
Both Rivers and Mrs. Maisel's stage personas are as women who are impeccably and even formally dressed, but end up breaking every stereotype of the polite, proper, well-educated society women who wore the same costume. They aren't playing demure, ditzy housewives or doting, ditzy mothers. Rivers' lifelong friend and former roommate Ruth Buzzy remembers Joan as being the filthy-mouthed and dignified-looking friend, a dichotomy that was met with insane approval. Rivers' edgy, stream of consciousness stand-up challenged societal norms and pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable for women to talk about on stage.
I said, and what's your favorite sexual position? He said, next door.
Despite their similarities, there were also differences between Rivers and Maisel. While Maisel relied on her family for support during the early part of her career, Rivers had to make do with much less. Joan herself has admitted to working all the time so that she would never be poor again.
I'm still paying my dues. I still, I've been up and down in the book. I've been up and down 3 times. And I keep saying, okay, I'll do it again. And each time it gets a little more frightening because you're a little older. You know, when you're paying your dues at 21, it's cute.
Right.
When you wake up and you're 55, it's not so cute. And when you wake up the last time at 60, it's terrifying.
On a side note, one of Midge Maisel's primary foils on the show, Sophie Lennon, seems to have been inspired by 2 real-world figures, Phyllis Diller and Toady Fields. Like Rivers and Maisel, Diller and Fields were both female comedians who broke down barriers and paved the way for future generations of female comics, but who played more into the stereotypes of women at the time, often using exaggerated costumes, vocal effects, and makeup to create larger-than-life characters.
Of course, last week I had a little grease fire in the kitchen. Oh, it was in the sink, actually. Got a greasy sink. I have watched bugs slide to their death.
If the trailer for season 5 of Mrs. Maisel is any indication, the 2 are going to share one more thing in common, and that is going to be getting their big break on a popular talk show. In 1965, after 7 auditions, Joan Rivers made her first appearance on The Tonight Show with then new host Johnny Carson. Rivers credited this episode to be her breakthrough, as Carson said to her on the air, "You're going to be a star." It looks like Mrs. Maisel might be heading into the same trajectory by appearing on the Gordon Ford show this season. If so, it will be a fitting end for a wonderful character based, or at least partly based, on a comedy legend. In the end, the influence of Joan Rivers on the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is pretty clear. Both women defied societal norms and used comedy to give voice to their experiences. Joan Rivers' influence on contemporary comedy is unmistakable, and she'll always be remembered as not just one of the greatest female stand-ups of all time, but one of the best to ever do it. I love her. You'll love her too if you look up some of her routines. And you subscribers to the channel and loyal fans can expect a Joan Rivers deep dive in the future. In the meantime, hit like, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.